The Australian Financial Review.
Hello, I'm Anthony Macdonald, Chanticleer columnist at the AFR. Welcome to our weekly news breakdown of all things business, finance and markets. With me today, filling in for James Thompson, is editor of the Australian Financial Review. She's the leader that also likes going on podcasts to boost her popularity. It's Cosima Marriner. How are you, Cosi?
With an intro like that, Ant, I'm fantastic. Thank you for having me back on the podcast.
It's really good to have you back. The last time we had you on was October last year. We spoke about tax dodgers, BHP, and the problem with 5% home deposits. A lot's changed since we had you in last time, and we wanted to get your view on some of these changes. We'll get to that in the podcast. But first off, can you tell us, who's the most interesting person you've met since we last had you on?
That's a tough one, Ant, because one of the great things about my job is I get to meet tons of interesting people from both business and politics. So I'll probably just talk about the people that I met most recently.
Front of mind.
Yes, front of mind. So I'd have to say that in the last couple of weeks, it's a tie between Fortescue boss Dino Otranto and Liberal MP Andrew Hastie.
Okay.
I caught up with them both at the Press Gallery Midwinter Ball in Canberra last week, which was actually a really fun night. Now, look, I'm sure you know Dino and Hastie are both from WA, and they both like to sort of position themselves as outsiders to the system. And Dino's in charge of realising Twiggy's big decarbonisation dreams, even though Dino himself drives a huge V8 Land Cruiser. And he runs up against the big miners like BHP all the time, particularly with this campaign they're running to get the government to dump the diesel fuel tax rebate. But I think Dino actually quite enjoys a fight or two. And then you've got Hastie, and he's a former SAS soldier, speaking of fighting. He's sort of quietly biding his time until the Liberal Party comes to him begging for him to take over as leader and make their party electable again. And he's a very thoughtful guy. He grew up in a family that values service to the community. His dad was a minister and his brother, he told me last week, he's a padre, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, in the Navy.
Okay.
And he's got cut through in a way that poor old Angus Taylor doesn't. And I found his comments the other week about preferring to be taken out in a box rather than bend the knee to One Nation are pretty bracing. And what about you, Ant? You also get out and about and meet a lot of interesting people.
Yeah. Look, I quite like the local heroes. In our jobs, we get to meet all these people that fly in from offshore, but I can't help but just like the local Aussies that are involved in our business scene here. Probably the most unexpected one, and I'm not sure most interesting, but definitely the most unexpected was the BlueScope chair, Jane McAloon.
Oh, yeah.
Who I met earlier this year, and you might remember BlueScope had the Stokeses trying to buy it.
Yes.
Ryan Stokes, Kerry Stokes, and this US steel company called Steel Dynamics. And Jane McAloon was the chairman, like completely under pressure from the Stokeses, from this bidder. And she basically stared them down from the start. She really threw some punches back at them. And I thought she was going to get steamrolled because the Stokeses normally get what the Stokeses want. And Ryan Stokes is an extremely effective leader. But 6 months on, BlueScope's running just as it was. I mean, I think she'd be happy with the defence and how it went. Her shareholders sort of got behind her and she did really well. And just the way that she went about that takeover, it was very surprising to me. And then when I met her, it was like, oh, hang on here. We've got a real player in corporate Australia that hadn't known before.
What is it about her that makes her so successful in staring down the Stokes?
Oh, she had a shareholder support. I mean, that's the number one thing you need when you've got a suitor on your backside. But I think the way she did it was just her approach.
Her strategy?
Yeah, the strategy is important, but just her actual approach, like her ability to meet people, look them in the eye, listen to them, ultimately, shore up that support to then go fight the good fight for them.
Well done, Jane.
Okay, Cosi, let's jump back into Canberra. The big distraction in politics this week was Prime Minister Anthony Albanese letting his guard down when he hosted a comedy podcast called Bush Deep inside the PM's residence, The Lodge. Albanese spoke about everything from his dog Toto to receiving a melon from the Japanese Prime Minister. He joked about having sex with his wife after his football team South Sydney won. He spoke about WhatsApp group chats and played a bunch of silly games. The headline grabber, though, was when he was asked late in the podcast during a rapid Q&A session while sipping whiskey who he'd shag, marry or date out of a bunch of women, and he eventually said Kylie Minogue. And he had to put out an apology almost as soon as the podcast was published. Cosima, you know these politicians better than me. Normally when they speak, it's all very deliberate. In what universe was it a good idea for Albanese to do a podcast like this?
Look, The Albanese government's had a strategy for the last couple of years about sort of bypassing what we would describe as the mainstream media or the legacy media and going to, these podcasters. They invited a bunch of influencers to the budget last year. They invited them back this year. It's all a way of them speaking direct to an audience and having very friendly hosts or intermediaries. They're not going to get as tough questions as what you would get from Phil Curry in the press gallery or someone like that. So it's been a deliberate strategy for a while. I think the Bush Deep podcast was a bit of a jump the shark moment for that strategy. Yes, Albo loves to sort of style himself as the everyman, be relatable. He gets on the deck spinning the tunes. He likes his craft beers in Marrickville and, he can get on a podcast and, shoot the breeze. But from our Prime Minister, Australians do like a guy who's relatable, but we also want someone who maintains the standard of office. And I don't really want to hear about his sex life. And I think I don't really want to hear about who he wants to shag, marry or date, even though it's perfectly acceptable chat in a pub. I don't have a problem with that, but it's not something that you want your Prime Minister going on and talking about publicly when we've got much bigger things to care about in this country. And the fact that he came out of the gate so quickly, 7:30am on Monday morning, the podcast went to air late on the Friday afternoon or, started getting written about, 7:30am Monday morning, comes out of the gates with a one-line, I unreservedly apologise for that. Tells you everything you need to know about how his office were like, actually, this is not playing well for us.
Yeah, I agree, Cosima. He's the Prime Minister, he's the leader, but at the end of the day, I look at it, he's a 63-year-old bloke. He's an elder in society and he's literally Australia's leader. If I'm sitting around after a round of golf or, a game of soccer or whatever, and there's 63-year-old blokes joking about stuff like that, it's a bit off.
You don't want to hear it.
Leave that stuff for the kids.
Yeah.
Maybe amongst your closest old mates that you were friends with in school or university or something, maybe that sort of stuff becomes acceptable, but it was pretty bizarre.
Yeah, it was. And it's also kind of disrespectful to women who are, successful in their own professional lives. They don't want to be talked about in that way by the Prime Minister in a public forum.
100%.
Now, Ant, Donald Trump's been back in the news this week. Bombs were flying for a few nights in the Middle East. That peace deal with Iran's looking pretty wobbly. The oil price is up and then it went down again. Equities are down. Do you think this is the start of a whole new leg of the US-Iran conflict, or is this just situation normal for this at the moment?
Well, there were definitely echoes of March, Cossie, in the middle of this week. March was a month where in the markets it was oil up, equities down every day, and sometimes it'd be twice a day, as the oil price sort of, jumped up on the war, down on the war, based on what people were thinking. Equities would either go the other way. And it could happen in the morning, there'd be one view, in the afternoon, there'd be another, but it was very dominant. It was the dominant trade. This week, there was signs of that on Wednesday and Thursday. It's settled down a little bit. The market wants to believe that the worst is definitely over, that we're not starting this thing again. But I think we learned the war is not over. The Strait of Hormuz is in the middle of it. Remember, this strait was open to start with, supplied 20% of the world's oil. The interim deal with the US and Iran stated that the strait needed to reopen to pre-war levels, but it sort of left the strait's future state undetermined or to be negotiated. Exactly who controlled it, under what terms, how much Iran could charge for ships to be navigating it. All that was sort of up in the air. And clearly that's a big sticking point right now between the US and Iran. That's why these tensions have flared up again. From here, though, the question is, does the US and Iran, do they really want to go back to the beginning? Do they really want to duke it out for another month or two? Do they want to spend billions of dollars to get to the same point that they got to when they signed the peace deal, right? And they're going to be negotiating the same sort of points, the same sort of things, more time, more money, more effort. The market's looking straight past this. Donald Trump is really got back into his old form this week. I thought, he called the Iranians scum. Any other president do that at any other time and we'd be surprised, wouldn't we? But, he's on the front foot. And then he also went Spain as well because, he thought Spain wasn't spending enough of their GDP on defence. And then he did a big 180 on that and sort of now he's friends with Spain again because they lifted their spending. So he's definitely in the news.
And unpredictable as always.
Okay, Cosima, let's get into the big news of the week. Telstra had a shocker, a big outage that affected thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of customers, depending on who you believe, took down rail networks in New South Wales and Victoria, and most worryingly, compromised the 000 emergency services network. Telstra said about 600 000 calls had failed, or not all of them were rerouted through Optus and TBG as they should be. South Australian police are investigating whether the outage may have contributed to one person's death. So Cosima, Telstra finishes this week in a media storm. CEO Vicky Brady had been on holidays in Europe. She flew back early and was followed through Sydney Airport on Friday morning. She's doing a press conference in Sydney as we record this. There's a lot of attention on her, more than I'd say she's had in her tenure as CEO there. Are we in a world where the CEO isn't allowed to take a holiday, do you think?
Well, I think that there's always been a world where the CEO is not allowed to take a holiday. And, that's the point of being a CEO. At the end of the day, the buck stops with you.
Mm-hmm.
No matter whose fault the original problem was, at the end of the day, the CEO has to take responsibility. I actually found it pretty refreshing that now Vicky's overseas. The outage happens, I think, at like 4:30 a.m. or something like that on Wednesday morning. It's not her time zone. She's not got her hands on the tiller back in Australia. So the CFO, Michael Ackland, steps up. He's the one that's been managing up close and personal. He's the guy that fronts the media. He's the one that she's delegated to. The system, quote unquote, works, right? Then it's clear that it's not all done and dusted by 9 a.m. that morning. She starts making plans to come home. She flies in. Let's remember, if she's been overseas in Europe, it's 24 hours to get home.
Yep.
She comes back pretty quickly and rolls in this morning as soon as she can and gets met by the press pack, which is par for the course. I think the outrage is a little confected about where is Vicky. She was overseas. A lot of people are overseas taking holidays right now. It's school holidays. She has kids. She's now come back pretty quickly to deal with this and the fallout. So I think it's been a bit harsh, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I just wondered whether she packs a suit with her on holidays or if someone met her at the airport with a suit as she was walking back through. But yeah, I think she was doing what a lot of people do. But like a network outage story like Telstra, as to what actually causes the outage, how data centers work and servers work and nodes and all that sort of stuff is quite complicated, right? And it's hard to get to the bottom of.
Yeah.
Do you think as the media sometimes we just get a bit lazy and go, all right, what do we understand? Oh, yeah,
Bosses
well-paid
away.
lady on holidays.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And Telstra is a consumer story and everyone, either they couldn't use their phone or people they work with couldn't use their phone or their mum couldn't use their phone. So it's something that touches everyone and it is a pretty easy gotcha moment, where's the CEO? But look, and as I said, Vicky had her deputy Michael Ackland stand in for her and you wrote that he did a decent job when the outage first happened on Wednesday. We're now at Friday. Do you still stand by your column?
Oh, 100% I do. I mean, I thought Telstra's response was as good as it could be in the circumstances. Cosima, the real issue here is the outage. It's not the PR crisis. I genuinely think this is laziness, just focusing on stories as PR crises rather than the actual outage. It's because we don't understand what's going on inside the network, inside the servers.
But did he explain that clearly enough, do you think?
So when he first fronted up, it was 9:45 in the morning. The network had its issues for probably 4 hours.
Yeah.
And I think he did the right thing because he turned up. This is probably the last thing he expected to do at work that day. Just remember that. He's fronted up. He was calm. He said, look, this thing's only a few hours old. We're working on it. We're trying to get to the bottom of it. We don't really know the extent of it, but calm down, everyone. It is going to be okay. We do know what we're doing on these things, even if we haven't got to the bottom of it yet. So I thought that reassurance was good. I mean, he didn't even blink when he got asked, so where's Vicky?
Yeah.
Like you said, he literally stood up there. He said, she's on annual leave. I've been delegated authority. It's me.
Good on Vicky that she's got someone that she trusts and someone who's clearly competent enough to stand in for her when she's away. And that's a key role of the CEO, is also to make sure you've got a good successor or a good deputy who can act in your absence.
Let's face it, she's on holidays. Her head's going to be in wherever she is. How is she expected to be across the issues where you've got Michael, a very good CFO, clearly a handy deputy, who's in the building dealing with all the Telstra people? He's the better person to answer the questions in that situation.
Absolutely.
Anyway, the politicians can't help but jump all over this story now, Cossie. Like on Friday morning, Angus Taylor entered the debate. I'm not sure if his phone line just started working again.
Maybe.
Or what. We're talking about something that happened on Wednesday morning. I mean, he's clearly unimpressed with the outage and how it had been handled. When we see corporate stories like this hit Canberra, they do go to another level. I mean, this one's in Canberra now. Telstra's probably always in Canberra. It's one that can get knocked around the most. How bad do you think this actually will be for Telstra?
Look, Ant, politicians are nothing if not opportunistic. A mobile phone outage is, like for the media, Same for politicians, an easy issue for them to get their head around. It's a consumer story. Again, something that is good for a retail politician. Of course, they're going to jump on it. I mean, you even had one of the Liberal politicians trying to call 000 to see if it worked or not, which was slightly irresponsible. But anyway, yes, it's got to Canberra, but I think what stands Telstra in good stead, there are a couple of things. One, Vicky's very well respected, across business and politics. People think she's a good operator. So they are going to give her the benefit of the doubt and trust that she has got this under control. Secondly, we're not at Optus levels of crisis yet. A couple of years ago, Optus had that cyber attack, which effectively ended Kelly Bayer Rosmarin's leadership. And then late last year, Optus's network went down. And this was linked to at least 2 people dying because they couldn't get through to 000. Now, we still haven't had confirmed whether this South Australian death is directly linked to the Telstra failure. If it is confirmed, it does take Telstra's problems to another level. It hasn't happened yet. I would also suggest that Telstra have managed their comms a lot better than Optus did. The fact that Michael was out there on the front foot, he fronted up, he was honest, didn't have all the answers, tried to explain what he could to everybody. Then Vicky turns up, flies in, and she'll now take over. So I guess it's now whether there are any deaths that are actually linked, whether Vicky calms the horses, takes the heat out of it, and most importantly, if more failures happen again or not.
Yeah. We sound like Telstra patsies here.
we
Cosy.
do.
But in all seriousness, there are 5 things I could go Telstra about right now. Vicky Brady being on holidays is just not one of them.
No. And also, this is the problem with tech. There are outages. Every company needs to have redundancies built into their network and et cetera, but nothing works 100% of the time, and I'm sure Telstra will do a whole, root branch review of what went wrong and how do we make sure it doesn't happen again. But mistakes happen, failures happen, and it's how you deal with them and how big the consequences are. But I guess and another aspect to this is not just what Canberra thinks about it, but what investors think about something like this Telstra outage.
Investors are very important when it comes to things like CEOs getting rolled.
Yes, they are.
The shares started the week at $4.98 each, and they're trading at $5 each this morning. So, investors are looking past
You're not
this
ruffled.
one. Like I said, there are much bigger issues from their perspective in Telstra and what's going on. And, there's been a lot of media this week, a lot of inches written that, this is the biggest test of Vicky's leadership, unlike anything she's ever come across before, all that sort of stuff. Sure, it's a test of her leadership, but the much bigger issue is AI, what Telstra's doing around AI. They did this.
Totally.
They did this as sort of like weird sort of outsourcing, insourcing agreement to try and AI ready the organisation. In my opinion, that's 10 times bigger story, how it deals with that. Telstra should have been just given what it is, given what it owns, given its infrastructure. It should have been Australia's data centre story. Strategically, I wonder if they wound the clock back 10 years, 15 years, if they're I haven't actually asked her this, but should we have been doing what, AirTrunk, NextDC, CDC are doing, building the data centres? Because they had the people, they've got all the actual network infrastructure and everything. They've got data centres. This issue was inside one of its data centres, right? It's just they operate their own. They're not doing the cloud services stuff for other people. So that's a big issue for them. The return on invested capital, so the amount of money they make compared to what they've spent on their network has been appalling. Yeah. It has been for years. It's just starting to get a little bit better. Vicky Brady's gone pretty hard on the cost cuts. Telstra's been pretty effective at squeezing through the price increases because it's got this premium network, allegedly.
So when it goes down.
Not looking so good this week. But that's why it charges people more to use its services. Obviously, this outage will have some customers thinking, am I getting what I'm paying for? And, and if they think they're not, if they believe Angus Taylor, switch.
Yeah.
Go to Optus, go to Vodafone, whatever. They can. It's a free world. And I think infrastructure providers out there, if you're running the train services or whatever and you've got Telstra, and you thought they were 100% reliable up all the time, never went down, this is a reminder that this sort of infrastructure, it's 99.995% reliable, right? There are little slips that happen. There are outages like this. So I'm not picking up any heat from investors. I think investors see this as a Canberra story. But like you say, it all depends. If there are deaths associated to the outage, then, it takes it to another level.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Ant, you mentioned data centres in relation to Telstra, and that takes us to one of the other big stories of the week, which was Anthropic and its efforts to bring its Claude AI model to Australia and rent a huge amount of space in Australian data centres. As you wrote about and our Street Talk column wrote about, Anthropic's running a tender process involving some of the big Australian data centre owners. It's told them it will rent whatever capacity they have available from mid-next year. Why does Anthropic want to come here, and what are they planning to do?
Why wouldn't you want to come here, Cosi?
Oh, tell me about it. Great country.
Yeah. I mean, we get so caught up in Australia's economy and the issues here. You know, there's a few big ones: productivity lacking, government spending, all the capital that's locked up in housing. We talk about this stuff every day, but step back, put yourself in the shoes of a big US tech company. You've soaked up whatever energy you can in the US. You're building your massive data centers over there. You're looking for a second home. You want to diversify. That makes sense. You want to go somewhere within the sort of Five Eyes network, you know, security-wise. You're dealing with information here and data. You want somewhere secure and somewhere friendly, a good strategic partner. You want somewhere with a reasonably stable government, rule of law. I know we keep changing tax settings and that, but compared to other places in the world, we are quite stable. And these are like tens of billions of dollars of investment. Mm-hmm. So you've got big companies looking to build big things, spend a lot of money. Australia's also got a data centre industry already. I mean, it's got the construction and development capability. We've got an educated workforce. We've got a lot going for us. There's a lot of reasons why it wants to come here. And at the end of the day, like Anthropic is just so big. It's growing like a weed. It needs compute capacity. One of the key constraints on its business, along with capital and regulatory approvals, is just compute capacity. It's got an IPO coming up. Yeah. Investors are going to value it based on its potential to sell these AI products in the future. One of the big inputs of that is how much sort of compute capacity it's got. Like that's what enables the AI products to be sold. So it's gone to the Australian data centre industry, like you said, and said, you know, we'll take whatever you can give us, basically.
So then how big a deal would be this Anthropic contract in the context of Australia and our place in the world of AI?
I think this is the big one.
Because it effectively is going to, if they get the amount of capacity they want, that doubles what we've got right now, right?
100%. So this data center industry here, it's growing already, right? We had 1.5 gigawatts of capacity as at the end of last year. We'll have 4 times that at the end of this decade. Like these things are getting built up really, really quickly because there's demand for it. But we've been approaching this inflection point where it's like the data centers are coming. Do we want them just to be for our own use, you know, business and consumer use here in Australia, you know, for your iCloud photos or Netflix usage or whatever, you know, our work documents to be stored on? Or do we want to turn it into something more? Do we want to turn this into an export industry? Do we want Anthropic to be using Australia as a base to train its Claude model? Do we want OpenAI doing the same? Do we have capacity for them? Do we have capacity within the energy system? Do we have enough skilled labour? It's all about, do we want this to become more than just looking after our own needs and turn it into an export industry for the country? And this moment of Anthropic coming here or not coming here, it could prove highly influential in whether we make that leap into data centers as an export industry or not. You know, this is like arguably the leading frontier lab at the moment, coming to Australia reasonably early, saying, we've got all this money, you know, we're going to be investing billions and billions and billions and billions in the next few years. We want to come here. Do you want to have us? And there's big hurdles, right? The big hurdle is the copyright changes. And from a dollars perspective, it's not the big issue. It's something that in theory might be able to settle with a payment that's much, much smaller than what Anthropic wants to invest. But it's actually quite important to everyday Australians. It's incredibly important to artists. It's like the real issue in amongst all this sort of like funny money and capital and like the sort of business side of it. You know, so Anthropic's told the data center developers that, don't worry, we want to train our model here. We're going to sort this copyright issue out. You speak to the politicians in Canberra and they're like, well, you know, they're getting a bit ahead of their horses here. Like there's a lot of water's going to the bridge. We just had the Record Industry Association down here last week. Yeah. They're, you know, very worried about it. So there are issues, but I mean, in my mind, this is the turning point where we go from, are we just going to look after ourselves here or can this be something more? Can this be the next iron ore. China, it's not going to be paying US $100 a tonne for iron ore forever from the Pilbara. I mean, it's great for Australia and it's done that for 20 years, but it's probably not going to do it forever. I mean, your mate Dino at Fortescue, I'm not sure if he'd agree with that or not. And one day I'll be game enough to say it to his face.
I'm sure Dino's listening.
But yeah, like, is this the thing that steps up? Like, at the same time, Costy, we're seeing rising pushback against data centre developments here in Australia. I mean, the local papers, the sort of city-based papers are full of these stories at the moment. So, I mean, just the past few weeks, I've seen ones about pushback in Lane Cove West and Cogra in Sydney here, Moss Valley, New South Wales, Southern Highlands, Launceston, Geelong, regional South Australia. How real do you think this community pushback is? And do you think there's a chance Australia just says no to these big sort of AI factory data centres?
Look, the pushback's real. It's very real. And that's why we're seeing these stories pop up everywhere. Now, Australians have always been pretty vocal NIMBYs. And now you've got communities that have the prospect of big warehouses being built in their backyard, which chew up a lot of energy and water. And interesting, the people down in Moss Vale were less concerned about the actual data centre that this company wants to build. But they were more concerned about the proposal to build a big gas plant in the middle of their beautiful paddocks to power the data centre. And the government knows that this angst is real, and they're really worried because in the US, the pushback has become very significant, and you've got, certain jurisdictions sort of saying no to data centres, and the government doesn't want that to become such a problem here. And that's why they're actually now thinking about creating some sort of mechanism for communities to enjoy a quote-unquote financial benefit when a data centre is plonked in their backyard. Because one of the concerns about data centres is not only do they chew up energy, push up power prices, potentially take all our water, the profits actually just flow offshore to big tech, And so the government is looking at ways of how do we make sure communities benefit from having a data centre in their backyard. It's a little unclear what that would look like, but that's definitely something that is top of mind for them because they know that the social licence for data centres to operate is pretty fragile. And it's a bit like the coal seam gas issue that happened back in the 2010s, a little while ago now, the way you get all these communities, they'll lock the gate alliance and suddenly, they kill off things very quickly. But look, at the end of the day, Australia's not going to say no to these big AI factories coming here. As you said, there's tens of billions of dollars on the table for us, and it is a way for Australia to kind of have a big role in AI, which is the sort of defining trend or thematic that we're experiencing as a society right now.
What you're saying, though, there's interesting, Cosima. So, you're saying, like people are worried about their quality of life and water, electricity prices and that. Yet the fix could be a bit of a payment to them.
No, that's not the only fix. That's part of the fix. They're hoping that will, hey, look, everyone benefits, not just big tech. But there's also, they put out these guidelines that if you want to build a centre, you have to basically bring your own energy, right? The data centre companies will say, yes, but we also need approvals to then connect into the grid. We're very happy to bring our own energy. We're very happy to show that we're not taking any water away from communities, but you need to approve these projects in a timely fashion. So that's one issue. There's the copyright issue, as you mentioned. And while Anthropic might be talking a big game about a copyright deal being imminent, as you said, the government is like, hold your horses, we're not rushing into this. And the tech companies have also told the government they don't want to do a deal on copyright here that then sets a precedent for copyright deals everywhere else in the world. So I don't know how they're going to square that circle. And then the other aspect is obviously when it comes to data centres is the benefit and the thing we need to watch out for is protecting our national sovereignty with these things. So there are a lot of issues to be resolved, and there are a lot of differing views within government about how best to resolve these. We wrote earlier this week that the Prime Minister is sort of wanting to take a more interventionist role and sort of steer the ship a little bit more, and I understand that he's going to be giving a speech about AI next week, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the next little while. Anthropic's talking about coming here, Ant, but Australia's Firmus is already doing things here. You and James spoke about the $20 billion Indonesian data centre last week. This week, Firmus announced they're raising nearly $3 billion in new equity, and we know NVIDIA has taken a bit of a chunk of that. Where are Oliver Curtis and his co-founder Tim Rosenfeld finding all this money? Because we know that UniSuper's not going to be taking a stake.
Yeah, huge amounts of money. This, like another US $2 billion, nearly $3 billion Australian this week. I mean, this is a private company raising money as a private company, Cosima. Like, that's the size of that raising, that's more than 2 times the biggest raising that a public company has done in Australia this year. Like, it's a huge amount of money. The money, I imagine, will come from the existing backers, like you said, NVIDIA, which is, Firmus customer investor. Firmus gives it a lot of money eventually to buy all the chips. So, I mean, like, they're right in the heart of this. But I think you find some of the other big investors like Cochu. There's this US investment fund that bought in a few months ago. I imagine they'll go again. Maybe Blackstone, which is one of the lenders. But yeah, this is not for everyone. Lucas Baird and Jenny Wiggins had a great story this morning about John Pearce at UniSuper, the chief investment officer there, Australia's 4th biggest super fund, saying, hold your horses a little bit, Firmus. We haven't seen enough that's got us investing just yet. But what caught my eye on this one, Cosima, so that nearly $3 billion, that was just for its Australian projects. So it's got this Indonesian one on top. So the Indonesian one's another $20 billion it's going to spend in the next couple of years. There's no mention of that in this raising, so it's going to have to raise another couple of $1 billion to get that one up. And then, it's talking about all these other big Australian data centres it wants to do as well. This thing's going to be so hungry, right? So at the moment, they're trying to have the prospectus in late September, which means it could list in late October or early November. But, I mean, the plans jump around a lot. The business could look very different come the end of September, but I just can't help but wonder if they're doing too much to be able to float this thing just now. Like, if you IPO, you got to just sit still for a bit, right? You got to sit still at least for the period while your prospectus is there. Sit still for the first few months on the boards. Like, you can't come out, raise money at your IPO, and then hit investors up again in 1 month or 2 months' time. Like, maybe you can. Maybe they'll be the first ones to do it, but that's not normally how things work. You normally got to slow your business down a bit. You get through your first year, just sort of like be a bit stable, tick some of the boxes that you were promising to tick. Whereas this company just wants to go.
Like a bullet at the gate.
Yeah, it's a bullet at the gate because it says the opportunity's there now.
What do you think about John Pearce's comments when he's like, he's not sure about the underlying business?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I'd say Firmus will invite him in and they'll, discuss it. And John will probably it still looks a bit racy to me. And Firmus will be like, yeah, okay, cool. Well, we've got these other investors who'll invest. Like, that's healthy. That's what makes the market. I'm sure John will read the prospectus and make up his mind then. We're going to take a quick break and come back with a great question from Paul that puts us on the spot. Cosy, back in a tick. If you want to know more about what we're talking about today and a whole lot more, AFR subscribers can sign up to the Chanticleer newsletter at join.afr.com/Chanticleer. Every Saturday morning, the newsletter pulls the best Chanticleer columns from the week and delivers them straight to your inbox. Cosima, we're in a bit of a dead zone in the corporate world, news world.
Certainly are.
Between June 30 balance dates and August reporting season, second week of school holidays in New South Wales, South Australia, WA, ACT. I think Tassie's just getting underway. There's no sitting week in Canberra for another month. The news cycle, it takes a bit of a different turn, doesn't it, this time of year?
It certainly does, and puts a lot of pressure on our newsroom and our journos to come up with their own stories rather than just rely on the news cycle, which is healthy, but we've also got a lot of people on holidays. So, we're doing our best.
Absolutely. There are a few data points worth watching next week, though. I mean, first up on Tuesday, there's the monthly business confidence survey. Cossie, you meet plenty of CEOs and business people. How would you rate confidence at the moment?
Look, it's interesting because in a funny way, they've all adjusted to the new normal of no visibility about when the war in the Middle East will end. They've kind of got used to the fact that this uncertainty around what it means for fuel prices and the flow-on effects for the cost of goods and services, they're almost factoring that in now. That's just part of operating conditions, right? But then you've got the housing market downturn, which hits consumer confidence. They're still grappling with some of the highest energy prices in the world. And then this sort of overarching lack of ambition by the government when it comes to boosting productivity or inspiring a bit of risk-taking. And then hanging over all of this, of course, is AI. It's still an open question what the ROI will be on the sort of increasing amount of money that companies are having to spend on tokens and how AI is going to sort of play out across their workforce and their operations. So I think on balance, there's not a huge degree of confidence, I would say.
All right, confidence down. Also on Tuesday, we have our big annual roundtable that AFR has with the former Prime Minister Paul Keating, Anthony Pratt from Visy, and a cast of CEOs and super fund representatives. Normally, this is about the corporate bond market and trying to get superannuation funds lending more to Australian business. I mean, is it a similar theme this year?
Well, we've also got the Prime Minister, Anthony
hello.
Albanese, attending this year, so that's quite an exciting development. Look, it will be similar themes to previous years, but there's also going to be a bit of a focus on recognising how there's a transition underway in the super sector. You know, for a long time it's been focused on accumulation, helping members sort of build up their savings for retirement, but now we've got a big chunk of the population moving into retirement. So the super funds are having to sort of expand their focus to how do they help their members manage that money they've accumulated once they're in retirement. So at this breakfast, we're going to be looking at how funds can provide appropriate annuity streams in retirement, what's the optimal portfolio construction, and then also like what are the growth opportunities for super in general.
Big topics.
Yes.
All right. And also from Tuesday night, we've got the US quarterly earnings season kicks into gear with the big banks, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, Citi. I mean, this is the big event in markets over the next couple of weeks. At the moment, big questions about whether the market's in a valuation bubble, whether the S&P 500 should be trading at near record highs. Fund managers for the moment, they're saying, well, earnings are actually really, really strong. So the earnings justify the valuations, which begs the next question. Are we in an earnings bubble? How sustainable are these earnings? So
what do you think, Ant?
I think at the moment, these earnings growths insane. Like, I mean, they're talking about 15, 20, 30% earnings growth for a lot of these big American companies. Like, we don't see those numbers here in Australia.
We certainly don't.
It's next level. I mean, it's happening this year. I mean, maybe it can happen again for another year, but, you know, you just can't keep growing like that forever. And we have this super cycle, the AI, or the capital expenditure investment that's going on. I mean, that won't go forever either, so it will back off. But it's just like for the next sort of 1 year's perspective, can companies keep growing at 25%? And I'm not saying no, because I was saying no a year or two ago and I was wrong, and the market's been up strongly for 3.5 years now, right? So it's really taught me, hang on, just think about what's possible here. All right, Cosima, it's time to take a question. And this week, our question is from Paul. If you have a question to send in, you can email us at chanticleer@afr.com. We also love it when you send us a question in audio form. Just record a voice memo on your phone and include your name and where you are from and email it to us. And check the show notes for more. Cossie, do you want to read out Paul's question for us?
Sure. So Paul says, how much government involvement in industry and business is enough? It seems your paper is critical of the government on both sides of this equation. Please be equitable and not so one-sided in your criticism. A simple headline count shows your biases. How do you reconcile this from an editorial perspective?
Great question, Cosima and Paul. Lucky we have the right lady here for that.
Thanks, Paul.
Cosima, editor of the AFR, over to you.
Look, Paul, I would say I take on board your feedback that sometimes it feels that we're sort of walking both sides of the street on this. Our general belief, I guess, is that less intervention is better, that government should get out of the way and let people get on with doing their thing to grow the economy and grow prosperity, you know, let the market decide, as it were. But there are some cases where we need the government to step in. We obviously do not think it's a good idea when the government sort of is bailing out old industries and smelters and tipping a bucket load of taxpayer money to sort of save jobs in the short term and not really thinking about the long term and where the country's future is headed. But there are other times when the market isn't working, when there is an argument that we need government involvement to fix things. We also need government settings to be right for business to thrive, right? And, you know, there's an argument that the recent budget changes were not great for encouraging risk-taking. They weren't great for backing investment in certain sectors. So there is a role for the Fin Review to argue for how the government should be, you know, getting involved in the economy or not.
Yeah, I think we're looking for like a judicious use of the government balance sheet.
Yes.
At the end of the day, it's just like nation-building stuff, productivity-enhancing stuff. Yeah, like jobs, future industries, export for the next 50 years. I mean, there are sort of gaps that need bridging that the government does have to step in and fund, otherwise things don't get done. So in my head at that moment, you know, is energy and data centers, right? If we do want this, we've got this real paradox where building batteries got cheaper, right? So we now have these large-scale batteries that have come into the market. They're working well. Now, they've taken the big swings out of the wholesale power prices.
Yeah.
So the energy generators can't earn the super profits that those peak times as much anymore, because as soon as prices start going up, the batteries come in and then it knocks the top off the prices.
Yeah.
Right? So we've got this paradox where renewable projects, say wind farms, solar farms, other batteries, probably aren't going to get built for the next few years because the power prices aren't high enough or aren't volatile enough
to justify the investment.
To justify it. Now, the data centres need these guys to come online. At the same time, the government says power prices aren't allowed to go up if the data centres come in.
Yeah.
So we could get to this stage where nothing gets built for the next 3 years, and then that's bad for the energy transition. And if we want this data centre boom, it means that won't happen. That's why we have the government balance sheet sometimes to help us transition through phases like that.
I don't know that the government has the best record when it comes to picking winners. I think that's the problem.
It's a great question, Paul. Thanks for sending it in. And it's a good week to have it with you on the podcast, Cosi. All right, Cosi, thanks for coming back. Like we said, it's been since October that we had you in. We've got to get you back in sooner next time. It's fantastic to hear your views. Great to get a different voice on the podcast. And thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Anne. I loved it.
If you like the podcast, share it with a friend or give it a review, as it helps other listeners find us. And if you follow us, you'll never miss an episode. At The Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. You can subscribe to The Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. Chanticleer was hosted by me, Anthony Macdonald, and Cosima Marriner. It was produced by Mandy Coolin. Our theme is by Alex Gow. Head of Premium Content is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.